History is to the nation as memory is to the individual. As persons deprived of memory become disoriented and lost, not knowing where they have been and where they might be going, so a nation denied a conception of the past will be disabled in dealing with its present and its future. And I want to be clear, globalization has plenty of positive things, and it's given us a lot, right? The fact that we are here interconnected with these fancy gadgets coming from different cultural perspectives, all that is a function of globalization, and that is a wonderful thing. But it's not all rosy. The cost, the casualty, effectively is memory and history. These are the things that we've started to lose out on. Young people, I don't think, understand this because no one has really told them this directly. Your ability to remember the past and to commit things to heart corresponds to the health of your culture. Your culture, whether you're from China, whether you're from Mexico, whether you're from wherever, is only as strong as what you hold in your heart. If you don't hold memory or history in your heart, your culture is in jeopardy every single day. And I think that's the big casualty of globalization. We're somehow told that we don't need to worry about that. It's stored in the computer. I don't need to commit these things to my heart. And the moment you commit that error, which by the way is a very convenient way to make you a very obedient employee, you put your culture in jeopardy. So my challenge to you is to think about history not from the point of view of history books, which are stories filled with ideology, but from the personal challenge of empowering yourself with history and disciplining yourself to develop the memory of the heart. Only then do you give yourself a chance, your culture a chance, your nation a chance. So these three sets of institutions normally represent storehouses of knowledge. They're conduits of cultural memory. What they offer, in combination with one another, is a kind of counterweight that allows human beings inside of a society to react to the problems of the present moment. As globalization is moving forward, and as the institution of the family, the church, and education become more and more undermined, goes the argument, people start losing the ability to address the problems that globalization is presenting them with. Potentially, some of the casualties associated with progress have to do with a set of values. This is a man who is a contemporary of the era that spawned Mr. Carnegie. As you kind of grow in material comfort, one of the things you may lose is the fearlessness, the spiritedness. When this type of martial value becomes undermined, that has consequences. It used to be the case, back in the day, that people saw softness as a kind of weakness. As war evolves, as we become more and more efficient at killing one another, we lose out on the face-to-face fight. There's something honorable and noble in that type of a fight. Let's say, for example, here we are, this is the month of April. COVID-19 is rampant still, as we saw yesterday, as we were rolling by Kitsilano Beach, even though we now know that there are 2 new variants that are spreading throughout our population. The beaches are full with maskless young people. Why? In part, perhaps, it's because they haven't retained the value of obedience to command. Not the command of the boss, your employer, but the command of the government. If the government is functioning the right way, there's a good reason, for example, public health, to take the orders of the government seriously. China, for example, has no problem with this. It's not so much that you hold the value of the martial value, it's because there's a fear that if you disobey the government, you're going to be in trouble, right? So let's not confuse those two things. But the martial value is without the threat of imprisonment. When a public official says, in the interest of public health, stay home, you do it because it's in the interest of public health. We now live in a world where private interest is the only thing that you need to think about or worry about. Now you have yourself a little bit of a problem because you start developing this ahistorical approach that tells you that all you need to think about is what? The art of money making. The problem with globalization, according to Louis Lapham, is that we see the art of money making as an end in itself, not a means to an end, but an end in and of itself. It isn't. It's a means to an end. Always has been, and I can say that with confidence, knowing history. That's the crucial error inside of globalization. To recognize it requires memory, requires knowledge of history. As those three sets of institutions become more and more enfeebled, we make the mistake more and more easily. I'm the first person who's going to criticize America, the early America with all of its genocide and all of its slavery, which is what the society is built on. But they also had something else. You know, everything that's clear is bent, everything that's bent is clear. We're talking about the early 1800s, approximately. It's worth noting that 80% of America was self-employed. What? Self-employed? Yes, I'm speaking with a bit of bias here. Nowadays, our young people, the children of globalization, aspire to work for a boss. They don't aspire to work for themselves, they aspire to work for a boss. Why is this? Well, maybe the family is saying that that's the right thing to do. Maybe the school is organized around this narrative as the ultimate thing that you should do in your life. There is, frankly, no counterweight. We are told in our society, in this growth-obsessed culture of ours, this ahistorical growth-obsessed culture of ours, that you should let yourself go, indulge, treat yourself, do what feels right. Whatever happened to self-control? Self-control is a kind of virtue worth holding on to if you want to maintain a culture, a society, if you want to instill some kind of a positive value in your little ones, for example. Self-control is a very important thing that has to be learned. We made reference to Jonathan Haidt, The Coddling of the American Mind, and he is someone who's basically talking about this casualty of progress, self-reliance. It's a combination of globalization and our thoughtless, mindless relation to technology. But our children, our little ones, nowadays have grown up, and now it's multiple generations, have grown up. When a problem occurs, you look for the adult in the room. You don't solve the problem, you run to someone to solve it for you, to be your proxy. And this is a generational phenomenon, and it's a serious problem. And it starts with the fact that self-reliance is not really reinforced or taught. And this, arguably, is another casualty of progress. America, after the Second World War, makes a decision. We're going to focus more on money than on our own culture, and on growth more than our own culture, on maintaining the economic disparity post-World War II relative to the rest of the world that America gained at that time. And when they did that, they had to change something in the minds of their people, who were good citizens that had these types of values within them. So how do you change it? Well, take away the college and expand the university, expand the professional school. Problem is that that model has become a global educational model. You don't need history to be a lawyer, to work for the corporation. These are jobs where a knowledge of history and a feeling of civic duty stand in the way of your ability to be the lawyer or to be the corporate officer. There's a value in vocational skills, and that they're difficult things to acquire. I'm not suggesting that they're useless, but what I'm suggesting is that unless you teach history and values other than economic values to your young people, you will lose your culture. As we're celebrating our convenience lifestyle and how fast everything is and how much amazing technology we have, we're losing the opportunity to develop embodied instincts. We live in a time, as we go into this decade of the 2020s, where that opportunity to have an embodied experience is becoming more and more rare. It's another casualty of progress. If you've never had a hard day's work, and I'm not talking about sitting in front of your computer, think of rural people and what they do in one day. Think of people in their 60s and 70s and how hard they work relative to a teenager growing up in an urban society. There's a wisdom there that can only be gained through an embodied experience where you cultivate certain kinds of instincts, human instincts. We're talking about, how much can this body take? If you haven't tested your body, you just won't know. Now, again, I'm not saying go, and live on a farm. You could develop the body doing a lot of different things, sports, etc. This army without weapons, an army without weapons, would be the moral equivalent of war, breeding, James argued, and he's a pacifist, some of the virtues essential to democracy. So as it turns out, the instincts developed through an embodied experience are essential, particularly in the context of an army without weapons, right? They are essential to the well-being of democracy. No wonder we're in such a lost state. Every generation has this problem where the sacred spiritual possessions of the past that have been bestowed upon them to some extent are taken for granted. What to do about it? Well, you have to have places, institutions, to go to remember these things. Our little institute here is quickly forming into a place that offers precisely these lessons. But ask yourself, how common is that in our world today? And the truth is, it's almost impossible to find. Our families are in trouble, right? Divorce rates through the roof. Mom and dad too busy to stay home and teach the little one anything. So what do? They entrust the school. If they can afford it, a private school. And the hope is that some of these lessons, this humble view of history, this feeling of gratitude when it comes to sacred spiritual possessions, the hope is that the school will instill this in them. And the fact is, some private schools nowadays do a much better job than public schools, but that's a fancy way of saying that education is only something available to the elite in our society. That's what we've been born into. I don't know, to be honest with you, if it's possible to even take this message beyond the relatively small room. Because for the message to find a home in the memory of your heart requires that every person here engages with this thing. That takes time. Once you get past 20 people, I think, it's basically impossible to do the job. So understand, it's difficult to instill this in the population. Always has been. If the family isn't working, now you have yourself a problem, because school is set up in such a way where for you to feel this message requires a willingness to learn. All of you have that, right? But it also requires a teacher who's able to do something specific. I have to be able to take something from the 1800s, from a man who's long dead, and bring it to you in a way that you can feel as relevant to you right now. Education is an art more than a science, and that's the trouble. if you have a combination of someone who can teach the art of teaching, and you have the willingness, and we have the right size, now you can put it in your heart. But think of how many conditions had to be met for you to remember something that allows you to maintain martial values or yeoman virtues. A lot of conditionals, right? Disabled in a moment where we can least afford to be disabled. Why? The reality is we have no legal framework stopping companies from applying the license to steal that they have, including Apple Corporation and Google Corporation and Huawei and you name it. There is no law stopping them from taking your lived experience as their property. It doesn't exist. Add to that biometric data, all of a sudden these companies can engineer you to be the perfect consumer and to be more obedient than you can imagine, because you'll feel like you're following your instincts, but you won't be following your instincts. You'll be following a planned idea of what you should be. That's what your education's about. That's what we're fighting. And believe me when I say it's a fight. So I'm going to do my work, I'm going to write my stuff, but realize what this decade is about and why you're going to school. It's not about as simple as finding a job and making money. It's about, will you be able to equip yourself with the kinds of things that allow you to hold on to your free will, to your agency, to your privacy. And it is very, very difficult to do in the best of times. If you're oblivious to that, it's because you're not paying attention to the massive forces that are at play associated with surveillance capitalism. So, good. We've talked about that.